He said if unstopped, the most heinous crimes will be allowed to go unpunished. Annan is one of the ICC's chief architects. He spoke as the ICC annual meeting is taking place in The Hague.
The ICC annual meeting has revealed cracks within the African Union, this over support for the Hague-based court. During the court's annual meeting, a number of African countries reaffirmed their backing for the ICC. This comes in the wake of recently announced withdrawals by South Africa, Burundi and Gambia. During the general debate session of the annual meeting, African countries helped tamp down speculation over mass withdrawals. Some governments that expressed support raised criticism, calling for more dialogue on some African members' concerns with the court. Others focused on broader problems, pointing to inconsistent action by the United Nations Security Council on global justice. The three African countries who've withdrawn have been followed by Russia, who quit this week, a day after the court published a report classifying the Russian annexation of Crimea as an occupation.
And now joining us on the line from The Hague, where the ICC is holding its annual meeting, is Otillia Maunganidze. She is the acting program head and senior researcher with the Institute for Security Studies. Otillia, it's nice to chat to you again. Many were expecting that this annual gathering at the ICC would be a crisis meeting, but we understand now that some African countries are showing support for the court. Now, what does this unexpected show of confidence mean?
Indeed, like you say, many were expecting, a mass exodus or at least announcements to that effect. But the reality is the countries that have largely been quiet when it comes to debates around the International Criminal Court this week were actually very vocal. Countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Botswana, Senegal and Mali came out quite strongly supporting the International Criminal Court in perhaps what was unexpected for countries like Burundi, South Africa, and the Gambia. What they were saying is essentially that we have been quiet because support was presumed. But now, as countries are withdrawing, these countries feel the need to assert their position and to say, we stand with those who are seeking to promote international justice and not those who are withdrawing. And
talking of international justice there, Otillia, Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General, is on record now saying that should the African countries leave the ICC, then the most heinous crimes will be committed on the continent. Now, my question is there any direct evidence that since the establishment of this court, there's been less human rights violations in Africa?
Perhaps the issue, if I can maybe clarify that, is not so much that the crimes there'll be more crimes committed, but that they will go unchecked in the absence of a judicial mechanism. What we have seen, particularly with regards to Sudan, is even though the prosecutions in Sudan have not happened, in part because one of the main indictees is the president of the country, we have seen the conflict in Darfur move from a high-intensity conflict to a lower-level intensity conflict, with some of the rebel movements choosing instead to not be as violent, so perhaps serving its deterrent effect. But at the same time, I think the one thing that we do have to face up to is that these crimes may still continue, but what will then happen is there will be no recourse for justice, and what that would mean is that those who would have feared prosecution no longer have that threat of prosecution and will carry on unchecked.
And how is the court itself also reacting to the criticisms, particularly from the African continent? And is it in any way calling for greater dialogue with the African members that now want to leave?
So from the court is made up of different organs. So I'll speak first about the Assembly of States Parties, which is headed by the Senegalese Minister of Justice. From the Assembly's point of view, there is a need to have very critical dialogue to meet some of the country's concerns, but to ensure that responding to these concerns doesn't undermine the ultimate mission of having an international criminal justice system that operates. From the level of the International Criminal Court itself, the judges have reaffirmed that they will continue to work, and that while there are withdrawals and that these are setbacks, they will work to ensure more ratifications if at all possible. The Office of the Prosecutor, which many see as the face of the International Criminal Court, has also expressed some concern with the withdrawals, but has indicated that they will ensure that they continue to operate as fairly, as effectively as they can. So they're putting on a brave face, and perhaps rightly so, now that they've gotten some support from other African countries, they can essentially continue, but it might not be business as usual. They will have to work harder and smarter to get their work done.
Mm-hmm. And this past week, we also saw Russia announcing that they will withdraw from the court, and the Philippines have also issued a threat of withdrawal. Now, are there fears that more countries will eventually join the African bloc and make this withdrawal a global phenomenon?
Right. So the first thing to clarify, Russia was never a state party to the Rome Statute. Therefore, Russia cannot withdraw from the International Criminal Court. What Russia had was it had signed the Rome Statute, but it hadn't ratified it. So their move was purely a symbolic one. Russia has never been a state party to the Rome Statute. They were simply saying, we will never be a member to the ICC. The Philippines, at this assembly this week, on Friday, reaffirmed its position as a member of the International Criminal Court, in fact. What it did say is that there was a need to have dialogue to ensure that the court operates better, and that the best way, according to the Philippines, to do this, which is the message that also came from countries like Botswana and Nigeria, is not to withdraw, but to actually seek to reform the court from the inside out rather than from the outside.
And finally, Otillia, at the end of the ICC's annual meeting, do you think that the court will remain the same? It will just be business as usual, or it will have to reform as we move forward?
I think it will start beginning processes of reform, but more in terms of the practice of the court rather than the way in which the court is framed. It will continue to operate in the way that it is, but when it comes to issues around case selection, I think for 2017 we ought to anticipate more in terms of cases from outside of the African continent and more in terms of a vocal assembly president. So we might be hearing more from Minister of Justice Siddiqui Kaba than we have been hearing over the past few years.
Otillia, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure chatting to you. That was Otillia Maunganidze, the acting program head and senior researcher with the Institute for Security Studies, talking to us live from The Hague in the Netherlands. Now,